Okay, thank you, Anuj, for joining our call. Anuj is involved in the blockchain environment, and he will talk to us today about what his involvements are and things that and brief us a little bit on what's going on in the blockchain environment and maybe cryptocurrency, ICO advisory, etc. So, Anuj, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do, please?
Oh, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm Anuj Khanna, and I'm CEO of Peak State Consulting based here in the London. Um, I've been working on ICOs recently, very recently, over the last probably 1 year, but I have over 20 years experience in the tech industry. And currently, I'm working as an ICO advisor for 5 very good companies using blockchain technology in different sectors. And the ICO market's quite interesting. I'm sure you'll have a few questions about it, but it's a 3.8 billion market, and it's. Excuse me. I think we should one more. You don't mind restarting the thing? There's too much background noise coming from your side.
Oh, really? Okay. Just keep going. I can hear you perfectly, and the recording was perfect.
Okay.
So you
Because
can keep going.
in the background, I can hear a lot of noise from my perspective when I'm speaking.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if you want to mute yourself when you ask me a question.
I can mute.
Okay, and are you going to edit this part out?
For me?
Are you going to edit the part?
Yeah.
Should we restart?
If you want to, sure.
Yeah. So I can restart, and probably if you could mute your microphone while I'm speaking, then it'll be good. Okay, so thank you. So I go again, all right? Excellent. So thank you for your kind introduction. So just to give you a bit of a background, my name is Anuj Khanna, and I'm the CEO of Peak State Consulting based here in London. As you can see behind me, it's London, so it's always cloudy, even if it's just about 10 in the morning. So I've been working in the tech industry for the last 20 years, working with startups, helping with their fundraising strategy and go-to-market strategy, going into different continents, in the telecoms area, in the digital area, in the e-commerce area. And over the last probably, I would say 12 to 18 months, I've got involved in the ICO and the blockchain space. I'm currently advising 5 ICOs, and they're very interesting companies using blockchain in very different market sectors. I can talk to you a bit more about that. And more importantly, if I can share any information about the ICO market in general, where it is right now and where it may go, very difficult to predict. But as of now, we have raised about $3.8 billion through ICOs. That's the cumulative sum. This sum has been raised by about 250 odd ICOs. There are many small ICOs which have come and gone and really not really raised the money, or they were aborted halfway, but we can speak about them later. But I would say that's the cumulative sum out of the major ICOs. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so let's talk a little bit about ICOs because you seem to be involved quite a lot in various, five. You said five various. So you as an advisor, what is first of all the value added that the companies are looking for from your side, and what are you looking for from the other side?
Absolutely. So it's quite an interesting question. There are a lot of companies who really want to do an ICO today. Most of them have a blockchain-based product, so it sort of makes sense to use that. The whole concept about the ICO is the liberalization, the democratization of the crowdfunding process. And when people are using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum, it becomes much easier to invest in companies which they like. That's the individual investors or family offices, HNWs, high net worth individuals. And more recently, funds and institutional investors have also started to get involved very reluctantly, but they do want to make hay when the sun shines, let's say that. But they will get more serious as they go ahead. So when most companies, when they're doing an ICO, they've heard about it and they just think it's something which you do where you have a white paper and you have a website, and miraculously hundreds and thousands of investors turn up on your site, they like your product and invest in it. Now that is the impression that they have, but when they start the ICO process, they will realize that the ICO process is not very different from the IPO process, initial public offering. So it's all related to your question about what do investors, why do investors need advisors or what they're looking for. And it's like when you're doing initial public offering, you need to follow all the processes. You need to file your information with the exchanges. You need to be compliant from a security perspective. You need to market to investors, very importantly. And you need to have all the legal admin product, everything in place. So it's very similar in the ICO world, that in the old days or the early days of the ICO, you could be just putting a white paper up and having a website, and the community, generally the crypto community, the blockchain community who wants to support you, would invest in your ICO. Now the same community has expanded, and the standards they expect from companies doing ICOs are much higher. So they expect a much better level of financial forecasting. They want to really know about your product as to whether blockchain is involved in it or not involved in it. And they want to hear from you about what is unique about your product. And they want to do a lot of due diligence. But honestly, they don't want to do the hard work. They want all this to be processed in a shell in a way which they can easily understand and trust. And trust is lacking in the ICO world. So when companies come to advisors like myself and a few others, there are quite a few good advisors in the market, I must say. They're looking for expertise, expertise in marketing to investors, expertise in terms of building products using blockchain technology correctly, expertise in terms of following all the steps of an ICO. So in terms of having an ICO, you need to obviously have a good white paper, you need to have a website, you need to have partnerships with exchanges, wallets, platform providers. You need to decide whether you're developing the smart contract in-house or are you outsourcing it? Are you going to attract all the investors through a partnership with a marketing established ICO marketing platform, or are you going to go direct to the consumers, spend money in terms of direct to consumer marketing? You need a strategy in terms of how you're going to tackle institutional investors, family offices, high net worth individuals, how you're going to target them, and how you're going to satisfy the information requirements. So as the list becomes longer and longer in terms of admin, legal, marketing, sales, product, that's where the need for specialist ICO advisors or product advisors come in. And I personally specialize in investor marketing. I do advise or share some feedback on other aspects of the ICOs, but I always recommend working with the best in the field. So if it's legal, I need any ICO which I'm working with, the 2 or 3 things which I look for is the product and the dedication of the team, that they're serious and they're just not doing the ICO to make a quick buck. It's very important for me. That's number 1. Number 2 is, their compliance. Are they ready to spend money on legal? Are they selecting the correct jurisdiction for the ICO? Are they following all the compliance standards? Using professional legal firms, following the know your customer KYC and anti-money laundering AML processes. So it's very, very important. So those are 2 things which are most important: the product, the team, and then I need to make sure this is a serious ICO and it's a compliant ICO. If those 2 things are in place, then I'm very much happy to help these companies. And depending on the company, some need a wide variety of help with the ICO, as I mentioned, all the different steps. Some only need part help, but generally it's teamwork. It's not one advisor. Sometimes they have 5 or 6 advisors on the ICO. One person can be a subject matter expert. So if you're doing ICO in the travel industry, as one of my clients for the corporation is, then they need an advisor who will come from the travel industry and can help them, etc. But you also need technical, financial, legal, investor marketing advisors. And as in, what I would lastly like to say is crowdfunding through ICO is a slightly more liberating or easier process to go through compared to an IPO or venture capital funding. But as I mentioned earlier in our discussions, the expectations from investors in terms of the quality of the financial models, the forecast, the product data, the team members is much higher. And as the market matures, people need more and more information, and they need to establish trust with an ICO. And that's what I think an ICO advisor and ICO founders can jointly do, is present that.
Okay. You mentioned the legal aspect. Where do you think today is a good environment for ICOs?
Okay, so I don't recommend any one jurisdiction, but generally, where I am dealing with ICOs, it all started in Crypto Valley, in Zug, in Switzerland. And then another jurisdiction which is very popular and has got a framework, an ICO framework published, is Gibraltar. And then obviously there are other jurisdictions. So these are the two jurisdictions, most common jurisdictions I've come across. People obviously talk about Malta, British Virgin Islands. Previously, there were some successful ICOs in Singapore, etc. So the jurisdiction of the ICO is something which is very, I would say, specific to the company. They need to take legal advice as to where do they do their ICO. They need to make sure they don't take any investors on the ICOs from countries where ICOs are banned. Certain countries ICOs are banned, but very specific categories of investors may still be allowed to invest. And then there are different rules in terms of whether you can invest in ICOs when they're going on, or the rules become different when the same ICO token is listed on the secondary market. So it's a developing environment, I can say. Me personally, as in most ICOs I've been involved in, are in Gibraltar and Switzerland. Both countries have a fairly good framework in place for ICOs, which is also evolving. And I see further down, I would say other countries would also become a bit more flexible in enabling ICOs. But the issue is that some countries allow ICOs under the label of utility tokens or security tokens. And some countries, they see every ICO as a security. They might see that because that's the law they're currently following. But as the technology evolves, I think most countries would also want to get involved in cryptocurrencies. So they might have some more clearer regulations in the future.
Hello?
Yes.
And that's for the regulatory framework. Now, in terms of you're saying, so obviously you're advising to take legal advice, very good legal advice, then choose the right regulation, right? Now, in terms of, you talk about the marketing is different from ICO. How different is it from an IPO?
Okay. So it's a very good question. In terms of when you're doing an IPO, there is a standard process every company follows from a regulatory perspective in terms of filing information, financial information, filing legal information, putting in all the disclaimers. So all this information is generally available very clearly when somebody is doing an IPO on a securities exchange. And even in IPOs, there is a certain level of marketing and investor roadshows, etc. involved. There might be known brand names, so in many cases, marketing might not be required. If you have a very known brand known brand name. For example, Aramco from Saudi Arabia, if they're planning to do an ICO this year, what I hear in the news, sorry, IPO, not ICO. So then it's different. As in, a lot of analysts and banks already know about these large companies, so they don't require that level of marketing. In terms of initial coin offerings, I would say 99.9% of the companies who have done initial coin offerings are not known to the investor. So these are newbies. So investor marketing is very important. And building trust with the investor is even more important. So one of the key things is that most people don't even know who the ICO investors are. And let's say they're shooting in the blind when they start off with the process. And then once you go in through the ICO process, you realize that there are companies who have already done ICOs, there are exchanges, there are platforms who have already facilitated ICOs, and there are groups and funds who have been doing or investing in ICOs. So from it's first good to identify who the investors are, who the potential investors are, though they are a very small group of investors compared to IPO. The second is more on the individual side of investors. These investors, again, they exist on forums, LinkedIn, Bitcoin Talk, and many other Reddit forums and Slack forums and Telegram groups. And if you're not part of any of these groups, you have to become part of the groups. You have to create the groups. You have to recruit bounty managers if you want to. You need to have community managers. And just like investor relations in terms of IPO, you need to have a full team sharing information with potential investors. So I think it's very important. Initially, again, there were very limited ICOs. So if you had only 5 or 10 ICOs going on in a month, then again, there were limited number of investors. So it was easy for investors to discover ICOs and easy for them to differentiate which ones they like or they don't like. Right now, there are hundreds of ICOs coming to the market. There are lots of news portals where the ICOs are covered. There are a lot of rating agencies which are growing. And there are a lot of listing agencies and platforms which are growing. So one approach is to be there with almost all of them. And obviously, it's an expensive process. So all in all, I think I'm going on for too long. But ICO marketing is important. There are several steps in that ICO marketing. It's not an expertise which is commonly available. There's lots of people in the market who say they can market an ICO. But I think all they can do is actually they can take your budget and spend it on Google or Facebook or ad network marketing. That might get you some limited results. But I think the key is, again, to do the investor roadshows, speak at the conferences, go to the events, have relationship with these communities of investors. And I think that's where the secret sauce is about investor marketing. I hope that helps.
Sorry, I was on mute as you requested, so I was speaking to myself. But what I said is that was very interesting because obviously the marketing is a big challenge, and that's where the capital intro really comes into play. Now, the other thing is that any successful stories that you would like to share with us?
Okay, so in terms of the ICOs, which I am an advisor on personally, they're all currently in the market. So this week we have a Globcoin, globcoin.io. They've just launched their ICO, pre-ICO yesterday, and they currently having some kind of bonuses for tokens up to 70%, etc. And they go into the ICO at the end of the week for a 1-month process. I have 4 other ICOs which are coming to the market. So, I can't really share the results on these current ICOs. I have helped certain ICOs in the background, not officially as an advisor, and they have successfully raised, close to between 25 to 50 million dollars. That's the range that work in. So I don't really have any historic case studies to share in the ICO market. But before I was doing ICOs, I was advising companies who were raising funds through VCs or the private equity. So I have a long track record over there, and I think most of the companies I'm advised, they're ranging from revenues of right from $10 million to $500 million today. These companies started about 10 or 12 years back with the VCs, etc., and they've grown. So all the names of those companies are on my website, which is peakstate.com. If somebody wants to go and have a look and see how these companies are doing, hopefully in 1 year's time, 2 years' time, I can show a list of 20 to 50 different companies I've helped with in the ICO space. And I'll be very happy if they all are performing well. Out of all the companies I've advised, none of them have really closed down, because normally startups close down in a 5-year period. Some of them have exited through a merger, or they've been acquired, or they've evolved into something else. But most companies, I would say less successful company might just have revenues of 10 million, but most of them are in the 100 million plus range right now.
Wow, that's very impressive. Okay, well, any events coming up soon where you're going to be and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, so next week we have 2 meetups in London. One is on the 16th, which is the Globecoin meetup. The venue is going to be announced, and I think one is on the 18th, which is the medical chain ICO meetup. Again, it's on Eventbrite. On this 22nd is the World Economic Forum, and there's an ICO forum in Davos. So I most likely going to be there. I have some meetings around that time. I'm also in Gibraltar this week on Thursday evening. There is a startup grind event in Gibraltar. And on Friday as well, I'll be in Gibraltar. So pretty much events and conferences are there almost on a weekly basis. There's also an artificial intelligence conference coming up. It's a very big conference in London. That's going to be at the end of the month in January. So I plan to be there, and I'm speaking at some of the events. If somebody is looking for any help in terms of speaking at events, or if they need any help with their ICOs, I'm available. I can't hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Now you can hear me?
No, I think there was a temporary message saying next meeting starts in 5 minutes. That's probably for you.
Yes.
Anyway, go ahead and ask me any questions you might think.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think we had a very good overview of the ICO environment. I think that you brought some very good insight to the things that people, are asking themselves about, and to develop a better perspective on this ICO environment. I think it would be nice to have another chat maybe after the ICOs have finished.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. I love to have a chat after those ICOs have finished, and obviously, I'm happy to introduce you to the CEOs of those different ICOs if you want to find out more about what they're doing and if there's any relevance. I'm happy to conclude the interview, if it's okay with you, to just give a small bit of advice to anybody planning an ICO, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So all I would like to say is that if you are a company planning an ICO right now, my advice is go for it. This is the best time to do it. The regulatory environment might be changing, the investor mood might be changing, but I tell you, anybody who's got a good product, who's got a good management team, and is really honest and serious about their company and product, they should be doing an ICO in 2018. That's the best time for it. Definitely, you need to work on the product. You need to make sure that you have a very good white paper and website. You need to have good financial projections, and you need to be absolutely honest and clear about all the information you want to share with investors. So you create trust. Trust is most important in any ICO. And obviously, it's also the product and team, etc., the legal regulations, etc. But I would just wish you all the best with your ICO, and I would definitely recommend for you to go for it. But please do build the trust with the investor and think long term. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. Are you going to share this interview?